Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing the introduction of my new book, Conspiracy and the Subject. I am not going to be going through the whole thing. The introduction is about 5 pages, but I'm just going to be giving a breakdown of the most important parts. So, number one, I lay out that this book is not going to develop linearly. That is, this book does not develop as like we start here, premises, conclusions. No. This book weaves around. As such, if you want to apply a Hegelian metaphor, this book is spirit, and spirit must other itself, and only through this othering can it realize itself at the point of being sundered. That is, spirit can only tear itself away from itself, can only other itself through going through these, what seems to be these convoluted discussions of cultural topics, movies, songs, but this is required to fully understand, I believe, the point that I'm trying to make, and the reason why throughout the book I tie in like movies and songs and art is because I think that all of these are very important to the well-roundedness of a reader and of a book, right? You have to have not just pure philosophy, you have to have literature, you have to have art, you have to have other forms of the humanities in it. So that's why I do that. Now, after sort of explaining this very basically, I talk about how this book is going, for those that are not associated and acclimated to Lacanian psychoanalysis and Hegelian philosophy and the terms and all the intricacies of it, they're going to have to empty their worldly holdings, and I use the Christian term kenosis, which is like the emptying of worldly holdings to realize the divineness, which I would say the divineness would just be realizing the book. So to understand the book, you have to empty yourself of all of these like worldly holdings if you aren't associated with Lacanian psychoanalysis. Then and only then can you understand it. Now, one of the points that I next make is that modernity in general has stripped us of these, or has stripped us of the divine. We're all very familiar with the term the meaning crisis and other things like that, which denote some sense of nihilism among young people because there is no more divine. The line that I use is that teleological goods are abandoned. As such, life becomes self-referential. Life has no longer predicated on anything else. There are no more values. People just live to live. And I use the example that Byung-Chul Han gives in his book, the 2016 book, The Burnout Society, where he says that after the death of God, the loss of values, the loss of transcendence, all this, there would be the idea that health and being healthy has risen to a divine status. And I used the COVID pandemic, which, of course, when he wrote this in 2016, he did not have access to in his experience. But I used his book and applied it to the COVID pandemic, and I go, yeah, this is exactly true, right? We see these parades for health officials and hospitals themselves. I use a metaphor. Hospitals become the empty tomb of where God once was because hospitals have taken on the divine status now. And my point is that conspiracy finds itself in this emptiness, loss of meaning, this lack of guarantee of the big other. Conspiracy comes in and says, I got you, I will give you this worldview, which is this which will give you a totalized sense of who you are, what you are meant to do, and who is against you, right? The classic Schmittian friend-enemy distinction is what conspiracy functions off of very well. And because of this, and because of this friend-enemy distinction, conspiracy is always there, and it will tell you, I will give you what you need, right? Now, I then, to end the introduction off, I define 3 terms, right? Number 1, I define the big other. I just say it's symbolic authorities in society. This becomes more nuanced in chapter 1. The big other is just symbolic authorities in society for now. And 2, I define what a non-lacking big other is. So it's like the belief that symbolic authorities in society are whole and they are not broken, and that they act as like a one movement, right? Like the government and the media, they all function as like one organism, and that there's this totalized sense of completeness that this organism functions by, and it's not broken, it's not prone to its own death drive or undermining, whatever you want to say. So that's sort of what the belief in a non-lacking big other is. Now, from these two terms, the big other and the belief in a non-lacking big other, I give you deception. So conspiracy, in short, functions off the notion that the big other is deceiving me through its completeness. That is, rather than recognizing the dialectical notion that deception of the big other is through its incompleteness because the big other cannot fully command you, that you are not subjected to absolute demand. And the schema of how this is set up, the need, demand, desire distinction in terms of an infant's life is set up in chapter 1, but what I give here is at least the point that you are not subjected to the absolute demand of the other, such that you have this sort of gap, difference, minimal difference from the other, and this is where your freedom is located, precisely. And conspiracy tries to absolve this. Conspiracy says that, no, the big other is actually deceiving you through its completeness, and the point that this will be developed into is that, as such, conspiracy posits a psychotic mechanism to function. Now, we don't get to that here, but again, the point is that conspiracy functions off of the belief in a big other, a non-lacking big other, and that non-lacking big other is what gives deception to the subject. So the way that I illustrate this visually for when you're reading is that deception, when talking about the otherly nature of deception in conspiracy, deception is with a capital D, and when I'm talking just about deception as in the real sense of deception, that the big other is incomplete and this provides a deception, this is in just like a lowercase d, like a normal term of deception. And that's all given at the end of chapter 1. That visual shift, the explanation of how deception is the doubling of the subject's belief on the big other. So that's sort of, not the chapter 1, sorry. That's given at the end of the introduction. So that's going to be the basic of the introduction. I've sort of outlined where I want to go. I don't believe that I tell this in the introduction, but if you would like, a interesting experiment would just be to quickly glance over the last chapter, which is about 3 pages, because if you look at the title of the introduction, it's Conspiracy in the Present, and if you look at the title of the last chapter, it is Unconspiracy in the Present. Now, what unconspiracy is will be a development in the 3rd chapter, and a little bit in the 4th chapter. So I'm not going to go into that right now, but if you want to flip to the last chapter and read basically what you're going to be getting into, because I give like a very basic summary. I reference various chapter titles and various topics from other chapters, and I cite it in the footnotes. So if you would like, you can read the last 3 pages and then be like, okay, this is where I'm going to be. I'm going to get here, and then the book is going to be done. So, but I would also, again, recommend that if you do want to read that and go ahead, that's fine. Come back to the introduction and then start reading the book like normal. And once you reach the end of the book in like a linear fashion, you read chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you get to 5, then you should read the conclusion again. Then you can look back at the footnotes and go, okay, this is how this tied into this, etc. Then the further Hegelian step is to read the introduction again. After finishing the book, go back and read the introduction. For Hegel in Phenomenology of Spirit, this was the preface, right? You read the preface after Absolute Knowing. But for me, it's going to be the introduction. And in fact, I actually explain in the last chapter, the structure of the book is like that of, I believe I use logic as the example, where the beginning of doctrine of being is the in itself of the realized idea in the doctrine of idea, such that you have to finish the doctrine of idea to then read back at the beginning the doctrine of being and to see how you were always already there in the first place. The truth is retroactive, and that once you reach the end, can you only truly understand the beginning as truth for consciousness, not just for us looking back as philosophical historians following the term from his lectures of history, but that it is for consciousness. In the moment of consciousness reading this, there is the truth there, and that is only through reading the beginning after you read the end. So that's kind of how my book is set up, in like a meta sense. Now, of course, you don't need to do all that if you just want to read the book. You're going to not come away with the full picture because you're not going to realize that we were already there from the beginning. But if you just want to read the book like normal, you can do that too. But you're just kind of boring, right? Um, so that's a lot. But the point is that it's a very Hegelian book, not only in the content, of course, but in terms of the structure itself, which is fascinating. I don't think a lot of people would do that with their writings. So yes, that's going to be the end of the video. Of course, check out the book down below, purchase it on Amazon, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And yeah, we're just going to be proceeding from here. So have a good day, and thank you. Subscribe.